You're listening to the DC Comics Chronicles, where we cover every adventure from the streets of Gotham to the skies of Metropolis and into the depths of Atlantis. With your hosts, Adam and the Emerald Enthusiast.
Welcome to another episode of the DC Comics Chronicles. As always, I'm your host, Adam. And with me, as always, is my co-host, the Emerald Enthusiast, Donnie. Donnie, how's it going?
What's up, comic book fans? It's the man whose ring runs on fanboy energy, the podcasting machine, the big nerd in green. It's the Emerald Enthusiast. And here today, we're going to talk about Detective Comics.
Yeah, we're talking about Batman, which is always a favorite subject of mine. I could talk about him endlessly. And but we're not alone this time. We have a special guest. I'll let you do your patented introduction. So go ahead, Donnie. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and beings of the Omniverse, please welcome from the Vigilante 1939 podcast and Italians for Spidey, this is Nick Caruso!
How you guys doing, man? I think that's the best introduction I've ever got. So you're making me feel good here. I feel really nice here on a mid-Saturday afternoon. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's great to have you.
Welcome to the show, sir.
I feel very, what's the word? I'm lucky because I have such a wealth of comic knowledge surrounding me between Donnie and Nick here. It's fantastic. So I'm going to soak it all in and enjoy it. But yeah, Batman.
I got to tell you, Nick, what he said a couple of weeks ago. He referred to us as fans of a certain vintage.
Yeah, well,
sure.
Yeah, come on, I'm very polite in the way I say it. I mean, I'm the youngest one here, unfortunately. Well, fortunately or unfortunately. So, you know, it's I have to respect people who have been at this longer than me, and I do. So don't make me start making fun of your hairline, Donnie, because I'm not opposed to that. You know that.
Hey,
yeah, exactly. What hairline?
Stop it. Listen, hair today, gone tomorrow. I'm in the same boat, so don't worry about it, man.
It's true, hey, man. I'm clinging on to mine for as long as I got it, because who knows how
right?
Yeah, but, I was actually shaving long before I lost it, so it didn't bother me.
Well, there you go. Yeah, at least you
yeah.
But,
And I'm the guy. Just real quick, I must have tried like everything. So I mean, I'm lucky I still have what I have, but it's hilarious because when I was younger, I don't think there was a remedy that was advertised that I didn't try, and none of it works, man. You know. And I always laugh at my son, you know, because when Nick was younger, he's like, by the time he's my age, there'll be a cure. I'm like, dude, they're never going to find a cure. I'm like, if there was a cure, there is nothing that works. Believe me when I tell you.
My brother used to try all those. Like he's got he shaves his head now out of more necessity than desire, and he tried everything under the sun. Like anything that was on the TV, he would order, and it was like, and I'm just sitting there thinking, all right, here we go again.
Yeah.
Like he'd come at the door and I'd be like, here it is again. Product number 4503. But yeah, well, listen, I got respect for everybody who's of different hair standing. And
that's right.
There are a lot of cool Batman related characters that do not have any hair, like Hugo Strange. So,
yeah,
that's right, dude.
So there we go.
That's a great one.
Yeah. He's a great character.
And you know, it works for Martian Manhunter too. So
it sure does. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And you know, I think my favorite thing with Martian Manhunter is the Oreo cookie fixation.
Oh yeah.
Because you know what, he may be green, he may be an alien, but everybody can relate to enjoying. At least I think Oreo cookies.
Man, he had quite the monkey on his back, man, trying to get that off. That cream filled horse on your back, you know.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about. Donnie mentioned Detective Comics, a specific issue, number 457 that Nick mentioned to us. Before we get to that, let's allow our viewers / listeners to get to know Nick a little bit in his comic background. We're going to ask a few questions just to so that our audience can familiarize themselves with Nick. So here we go. So when did you start reading comic books that you can recall?
I started reading comics I was born in 1965, February 3rd, 1965. So I just celebrated a birthday.
Happy
57 years
birthday.
old.
Yeah. Happy
Thank you very
birthday.
much. And I didn't say that to plug my birthday. It's in the context of these issues because we had I actually lived in the same suburb, Westchester, Illinois, that I did back then when I was a kid. And we had this wonderful drugstore about 3 blocks from the house called Golden Drugs. And I wandered in there, I think it was like April or March of 75. And it was the first time I saw a spinner rack. And it was like, I can't tell you the elation and the feeling of seeing that thing. Because my only really recognition with superheroes was the Batman 66 show, which I would watch when I would come home from school, and the 67 or whatever Spider-Man animated series.
Right.
So like the first thing that jumped out to me was this Batman issue 262. The cover of it, I actually have it on my shirt. It's a Scarecrow issue. It was written by Daniel Neal. I think Ernie Chan was the artist at that time. And I just grabbed it off the spinner rack. I think it was 50 cents. It was a 100-page giant. Yeah. And gentlemen, I went home and I read that thing and it changed my life forever. I can't tell you what it just did to me, because not only did I not know who the Scarecrow was, I was reading a Batman that I was not familiar with because I only knew him from the Adam West show.
Yeah.
And at that time, that was my Batman. I didn't understand as a 10-year-old, it was campy and all that. It was just, it was what it was. Biff, bam, pow, all that stuff. And I was reading this really like chilling story with the Scarecrow character. And all I know is that it was like, I just wanted to keep, that was it for me, man. I'm like, I went back there and it took me a while to realize that the issues come out monthly. It's not like there's a new one every day. I had no clue. I thought maybe if I go back there, there's another Batman issue or whatever.
Yeah.
So that started the whole thing for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. So you already answered actually the second question here. So I'll skip to the third one. Of all the Batman writers, who is your favorite?
Well, you know what? I mean, I am a prisoner of that Bronze Age. And it seems that, and there's been great stuff. I mean, Frank Miller.
Good taste, sir.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm not going to tell you Jeff Johns. We could go on and on. There's been just legendary stories that Jim Lee, I mean, just a lot of stuff, but there's something about that era. And I wonder, I don't want to sound like my father. You know how our fathers always tell you the era they grew up in was the best, and the music they listened to is the best, and the movies that they watch, and everything now is crap. I'm not one of those people, but there's something about that yellow oval, that lighter blue color, that Neil Adams, Jim Aparo, Dick Giordano, just those artists that I grew up with, that I've never felt more of a connection to that era and that image of Batman, which is so classic. And I don't feel it today, even though I'm reading some stuff that's absolutely incredible and legendary. But there's no doubt, my guys, that era, that 70, when I jumped on board 75 to the early 80s, 82, 83. And then, even the stuff that came post-crisis was great, but that's just my sweet spot. That will always be my thing. And I buy all the collected. I try to buy as much stuff of that as I can.
Awesome. Yeah. That was actually my first trade paperback ever, was at a Comic-Con, was A Death in the Family.
Wow.
And I remember reading that because, like you say, all I had was spinner racks, and I was from a small town. You missed an issue, it was gone. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is a full story. And it was A Death in the Family. And it was amazing. So I remember like leaving everybody that I was there with, and like I was in a big arena and I ran up to the top of it and just sat there and read the whole thing. I was like, forget you guys until I'm done.
You know what's odd is that Batman is probably, I mean, it always goes back and forth between, depending on my mood, because sometimes I'm like hopeful and happy, and sometimes I'm miserable and whatever. And so, but whoever, like, it's either Batman or Superman that are my top two, and they kind of alternate. But the funny thing is that I first read a Batman comic book probably in 03. Like, that was my first time that I actually read a Batman comic. And so, like, Donnie's mentioning A Death in the Family. Yeah, I'm sure I've read it, but it was, 2006 or 7 when I read it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I had to read it before the Red Hood, the Return of the Red, because I remember reading, and I know how I got into it. I was reading Hush, and they're talking about Jason Todd being dead, and all of a sudden he's there, and I'm like, wait a minute, what did I miss? I missed something.
Right, exactly.
I missed something. So I called my comic book guy. And I'm like, what the hell are these guys talking? I'm confused. He's like, don't worry, I got the trade. I'll put it in your bin. I'm like, all right, we're good. So when you talk about these things, it's like, yeah, sure, I've read all the the must, if you will, the top 5 on everybody's list. You go on IGN, they got the top 5, top 10. Yeah, I've read them, but I didn't have the experience of reading them when they were,
Sure.
in their publishing cycle. Like the first comics I had that I can remember. It was at a grocery store, the first one I ever got. So it might have probably a spinner rack still. It was I don't know if you guys remember, there was a series in 1990. It was a live action Zorro TV series.
Yes.
And
I watched that.
Marvel was publishing tie-in comics to that that show.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed. I still am with Zorro. Don't make a statue because I'll buy it, folks. Just McFarlane, stay the hell away from the Zorro license, please. I can't afford this stuff. But anyway, so I love that character. I love that series, and my mom bought me that issue, and that was the one that somehow she managed to get me all 12 because I didn't know monthly this, monthly that. So I had the whole set. The first DC book I ever got was the Man of Steel #1 from 1991, I think it was. Whatever it was. And so Batman, I wasn't reading like he was my favorite, but I wasn't reading him until 03. My conception of Batman was Batman 66, Batman 89, and the movies, right? That was and then the animated series. That was Batman to me.
Yeah.
And then the comic thing happened, and then it was like, all right. And my wallet's been crying ever since. But But you talked about writers of a certain era, Nick. What about artists? Well, who's if you had to pin down one quintessential favorite of yours that draws Batman or drew Batman, who would it be?
Okay, well, that's tough because I guess for me it's always going to be Neil Adams.
Okay.
And again, going back to that era, but I give some honorable mentions to Jim Aparo, who just drew most of the stuff that I read, and Norm Brayfogle, who is just another incredible artist that he didn't have the longest run on there. But then, guys, there's also these other guys from that era too, like I said, Dick Giordano and Irv Novick, and just it was just I can't think of the other guy, Garcia, who kind of is the guy that draws all the characters, but it was just there's something about that time where in our modern era here now, how they draw the characters. There's some beautiful stuff. There's some beautiful artists, but it just feels more comic booky to me back in those days.
Well, this is the Batman that I remember when I first started reading Batman in the 70s. This is the imagery that conjures when I read this. It was a little bit before what we read here, a little bit before I started reading, but this is what I remember. These are the images that I could conjure in my mind of that Batman. So, yeah.
I would agree with you, my guys. Yep.
And it's funny because, like, again, going back to my preconceived idea of what Batman was, I remember, as a 4-year-old watching, they weren't, live as they were happening, but the reruns of Batman 66. So when I see him in that blue, gray, and the yellow oval, the ears are a little bit longer here, which I prefer because the other ones look like two stubs beside his temple. But I recognize that as like, all right, that's kind of what I recognize over here. It looks a little different, but sure, that's Batman, right? And it's insane to think that on the comic page I prefer him with the blue and gray and the thing. I wonder if they're ever going to do that. If at some point down the road, they're going to do the Matt Reeves thing now, which I'm hyped over the moon for. But I wonder at some point if they're going to go in live action and try the blue and gray and the oval at some point.
Yeah, I would probably tend to say no. I just don't know that would translate to
like it'd have to be a
that.
dark blue if they're going to do it.
Exactly.
Yes, the light blue wouldn't work. Yeah.
It just wouldn't work. I mean, 89, he still looks.
Oh, yeah.
The 89 Keaton looks beautifully like it is out of the comic pages.
Absolutely.
But
yes.
And I guess if you recolored that and did it, it would be the closest you could get. But pretty much, guys, I just don't see that. Yeah. I'm not sure I want to see that either, to be honest with you. I think it's okay to have that image of him, that classic thing, and then in the movies, adapt it, make it look just a little bit more realistic.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, like when you look at this image, in the book we're going to cover now and of that era, when you look at that image of Batman, what I like about it is he's not this hulking, pro wrestler, which is, right. I love the modern artists, but a lot of them draw him like he's
Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, or Hulk Hogan and with more hair. So it's like, I get it. I get the visual, look, the intimidation factor. But when you think about a guy, like if you were going to sort of visualize this and say, you put this in a live action scenario or in a real world setting, how's this guy going to move around that with that agility and be that, don't get me wrong. There are some athletes and wrestlers that are that big that can move around, but the frequency of that is rare. Mm-hmm. Not many athletes can be that size and move the way Batman is required to move. So I like the fact that in these books, in these early, these 70s, he is like he's built, but he's slimmer. There's an agility to him. I dig that. It makes everything I'm reading, as fantastical as it can get, a little more plausible. So I do appreciate that.
There's a layer of realism when you read that. Yeah. So go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say, I don't really think that bulkiness came till Frank Miller, right? Till The Dark Knight Returns. Yeah. And then I think because that was so big, artists started to try to adapt that and bring that more into the modern age. But that's why I'm so excited about Pattinson in the Batman, right? Because he's got that lean. Even Bale pretty much had that too. And listen, I love Ben Affleck as Batman. I've been on record. I still think he might be a beautiful quintessential guy, but he is the bulkier version. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's more the modern version that we've been reading about the last 15 years or so, almost the way Jim Lee, a lot of guys have drawn him in this bigger fashion, but I agree with you guys, man.
Yeah. Long and lean. Go ahead.
Long and lean was always better for me. It always looked better.
Well, and I would say too, with Ben Affleck, he's more indicative of like, let's say, the 40-year-old boxer who's had a bunch of injuries, but he still has the knockout punch power. That's what he's looking for. Pattinson, we're talking about somebody who's going to rely on agility and his training. So it makes sense that Pattinson wouldn't be the way that Ben Affleck is, So
Absolutely.
I think that's definitely a better avenue for them to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no. So I really appreciate that aesthetic. When I was as I was rereading, I'm like, I dig this.
So, sir, besides the issue that you just mentioned, what's your other favorite single issue Batman? Issue of Batman?
Well, you know what? This is going to sound, because this is probably everybody's, but Batman 251, the Joker's 5-Way Revenge.
I knew it was coming.
Is just, and I'll tell you a funny story about that issue. So when I started reading, it was 262. And somewhere in my comic reading, a few months after I started collecting, I saw an ad for that issue. And back then you had to cut something out of the comic and put your $5 in an envelope. Uh-huh. And I think it was Mile High Comics in Denver, which I don't even know if they're still there, but they were the quintessential.
I'm pretty sure they still are. Yeah. Yeah.
And I did it, and I got the issue. It came in the mail. It took probably 8 weeks. And when that thing came to me, it was like the Holy Grail. I just, and so that was the first time I ever went and bought a back issue. But I had a dilemma, guys, because I had to cut the comic that I was reading. And while I didn't have to cut a page, it still was awkward because it ruined that comic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so now I had to rebuy the comic that I cut the little ad out of it. Yeah. So those days, it was very troublesome, gentlemen, because I didn't know anything about comic shops. I got all my stuff from the drugstore. And so, and then they would have those beautiful treasury editions. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? The bigger ones.
Yes.
Yeah, would reprint. So I would be like completely like befuddled what to do. I'd have to cut these things out. And then I would have to order once again the issues that I was just reading. So it was a crazy time.
Yeah.
That brings up a scary story for me because
go ahead.
It's a traumatic story, but I'll tell it. So I had a bunch of issues. I'm looking at it now and it makes me cringe. I mean, it looks beautiful, but I know what's behind the glass and it bothers me. There's 6 issues that are signed by various people, artists or writer, what have you. So I took it to a framing place, close by my house, and I said to him, put the comic behind, put it in the frame. Now, when I meant take the comic out of the bag and board, right, and put the actual comic behind the frame.
Yeah,
I left with the understanding that he knew what the hell I was talking about.
So
he called me back the next day. He's like, just to confirm, you want the cover out of the cover, right? And I thought he means the bag and board.
Oh,
I'm like, yeah, all right. So I let him do his thing. So I go pick it up, and it's this beautiful frame, all these signed friggin' things. And then he hands me a bag, a plastic bag. I mean, what is this?
Oh my
like,
God.
Your comics. I'm like, my what? I'm like, my comics are here. He's like, no, the covers are there. I'm like, wait a minute, wait a second. You cut my comics?
Oh my God.
What the hell is wrong with you?
Oh, my soul hurts.
I can't listen to this story, man. Stop it.
Literally me yelling at it for 15 minutes. And listen, I'm not a Karen, but in that 15 minutes, I might as well have been. But it's like, what are you doing? So like I try not to, like, it looks nice. If I take a picture, you guys will say, man, because I'm like,
looks beautiful.
I don't care how you do it, but you redo this and you put those comics back in there. I don't want to see them in a bag.
Oh,
and
that's a horrible story, man.
Oh gosh.
It's so funny too, because obviously you guys know my son Nico.
Yeah.
And so, raising a young boy, and there's nothing more exciting that he kind of followed in my footsteps, obviously, and likes everything that I like. I don't know how that happened, but somehow it did. But comic care has always been something that I have stressed upon him as a young man, to make sure he washes his hands, to make sure he treats the comics with care. Because when I was young, I remember 2 issues of The Brave and the Bold. And it was a great story. It was Two-Face with the Joker, and Batman was teaming up with Green Arrow. And as a young kid, I think I was eating some donuts or whatever. I didn't know. And I got chocolate all over these 2 issues.
Yeah.
And at that time, I didn't have bags and boards. I would keep them like in a shoebox, right? Yeah. So I go back to read them, and I'm like, what's all this smudge? They're all smudged up. I'm like, what did I do? And I'm like, oh my God, how did I do that? I wasn't caring. And again, guys, those days it was very traumatic because I didn't know how to get those issues again. It was a few years later that I discovered Mile High Comics and rebought them. But so I've always, from Nico, from a very young boy, I've always said, son, if you're going to handle the comics, go wash your hands. Don't eat. Don't be drinking any cans of pop around them. Don't put them. Be careful where you put them. I'm like, these are things you have to care for. Yeah. And it does create a little bit of stress with it, but I think it's a good stress because it teaches someone to value your possessions a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, it's still, I'm giving it the side eye as we're talking. I'm like, I can't. It's just this. Oh, by the way, I just want to report to everybody that happy ending to the story. That place is out of business. So
that would be a good horror story to tell comic book fans. I could see us all sitting around the campfire and you terrifying everybody with that.
I'm gonna scare some kids with that story every Halloween from this point forward.
Oh man.
That is not a good story, dude.
So with you now, you've said your favorite single issue story, but if you had to give a full story arc, your favorite complete story arc for Batman? What is that?
Again, there have been so many great ones, and we've just recently, but again, for me, it would be Nightfall.
Okay.
Yeah. Nightfall was something that I got out of comics for a while, and I got kind of hooked back in with the death of Superman. Was out of comics. I had met my wife. We got engaged. We moved into an apartment, and I just kind of, a few years there, just divorced myself from comic book reading. Happened to see a line around the block at a comic shop, which was near an office I was working at. Said, "What's going on here?" Went in there, and it was the death of Superman. And I didn't know anything that was going on. Then it became a news story. It was all over the news. Superman died. So the guy was really nice. He reserved the black bag for me, and then he got me all the prequel issues of Doomsday Coming. And he said, "Are you you're a big Superman fan?" I said, "Actually, I'm not. I'm a huge Batman fan." And he says, "Oh, you're going to be really excited. They are doing a big Batman story coming up called Nightfall." He goes, "You want to get in on this now?" So he started collecting for me the prequel issues. And that to me was another golden time. I got married, in 1992. I think those issues were coming out right before it or during or whatever. But I got to tell you guys, I could not wait for Wednesdays to run to the comic shop and just read that story, the whole origin of Bane, the Sword of Azrael. And so that's a very, it's also the time, but I love Nightfall so much. I really do. Now there's, when Azrael takes over as Batman, it loses it a little bit for me, but then when Bruce returns, but that whole encompassing arc to me is still my favorite.
It's funny hearing you describe when the guy, is like, "Oh, is Superman your favorite character?" And you tell him something else, and that's the hook to get you back. My guy did the same thing, because I went in there. I remember the only reason I got back into comics was we were going to Italy to visit my grandparents, my grandmother, and my cousins. So I'm like, I need something to do on the plane. The movies usually suck, the ones that they just. So I'm like, I can't sleep because of the turbulence and all that garbage. So I need something to read. So the comic book store was like literally across the street from my house, and the main intersection, and there it was. He moved a couple times, so I've had to follow him. But anyway, he was right there. So I go in. I hadn't read a comic in years, and I'm like, I need something to read. Can you make any recommendations? And he goes, what do you like? And I said, or who were your favorite characters? I said, well, Batman and Superman. And he's like, well, I got something just for you. Let me go in the back and get it. So goes back there, comes out with The Dark Knight Returns. So rings me up. I read it on the plane. I finished it in one sitting. And as I'm reading, I'm like, wait a minute. Batman's, 50, 60 age. Yeah, I'm like, wow, DC's got some, they've got testicular fortitude. They age back. I didn't know what an Elseworlds was. So I'm like, they got some testicular fortitude. They age Batman up. Who would have thought they would have ever done that? Because I always knew, okay, these characters have to stay perpetually max 35, for these. And so I was very impressed. And I read it on the way back as well. So I read it two times over. And then I went back. As soon as I got back, like 2-3 days after, I went back. And I'm like, that was really good. You got anything else? And he's like, well, hold on. And he goes back there again. And he slaps Kingdom Come on the counter. And I'm looking at the art. I'm like, oh, this is my first exposure to Alex Ross. I'm like, holy shit. This is top end. Like, this should be in a museum. What's it doing? So I read that, and like instantly, like within a week, I was back there.
We all know this feel. I like how he's describing it. He's like, "You got any more? You got any more? Anything else?"
And so he's like, there's something that just finished, Batman wise. It's called Hush. He goes, I got the two hard covers. Well, okay. So I read through that, and then I didn't even get the first physical issues I got for Christmas one year. My sister got me the first 6 issues of Batman and Superman from Jeff Loeb.
Great
After
stuff.
that, honestly, I think it was December 27th. I called him of that year, and I said, all right, this title, I want it on, like, can I get it monthly? And he's like, yeah, I'll put it on your pull list. And I'm like, okay, this is the one. That's it. I'm good. And it's like, they're starting a new story arc in the Batman book that you read, The Hush, following the Hush. I'm like, well, okay, one more. But why not? And then I'm thinking, I'm like, you know what? I got Batman, Superman, Batman. Just to make things equal, I should add Superman. You know, that's why I have the solos and the time. And it's like, that's a good idea. And so, yeah, maybe a month went by before I'm like, well, now I need the Justice League because at least I've got one book with all of them in there. Yeah. And then from there, it's like every 2 weeks I kept adding and adding, and it was ridiculous. But here we are. And now tentatively, I'm back down to 6 physical books per month. So we'll see how long that lasts.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm at now. But yeah, so that story rang a few bells. It's the cult of comic book collecting. It's a different cult, but you know.
Yeah. How many times have we gone into a comic book store and it's like, yeah, I'm just going to get these 3 or 4 issues, and then you see something else and you're like, that too.
The best is
the floodgates open.
No, you know what I do now? See, I've got a good system now. I wait till my mom does her weekly shopping, and I give her some money. I'm like, here, go by the comic book store. Here's the amount you need. Grab my stuff. Because if I go in there, it's over. Like I'll come out $300 poor. So it's like I better not even go in there.
Yeah.
Like he had a Christmas party before the craziness of the virus. He had a Christmas party where we'd all gather at his shop. We'd have a meal. We'd shoot the crap for a couple hours. Even then, at a Christmas, like when comic buying is not on the brain, I walk out of there with either something on my pull list that I didn't know I wanted, or I physically walk out of there with something. And so, how does this happen?
Right.
It's it's crazy, and my son Nico is out of his mind too, because he's further expanded comic book reading beyond to all the different independent titles and all the great people that he's conversed with on Twitter. So like, he just takes over now. He's he's got a full-time job. He's still here at home, so he's my guy now. I either go with him or he goes by himself, and I am not responsible. I said, this is all on you, dude. And he's like, well, you read some of them too. And I'm like, I do, dude, but I'm not reading 20 titles like you are.
Yeah, I used to be at the 20 mark, but I'm like, I can't. For space, I mean, well, technically I still do because I get some of them digitally.
Yeah.
For the space purposes, it's like I can't justify this because where am I gonna put everything?
Sure.
Like literally, I'm gonna be swimming underneath them.
And they come out like weekly, like bi-weekly now. Like, Batman comes out twice a month. I know we're back into reading Spider-Man. It's like a weekly title.
Yeah, Batman.
Detective Comics is weekly now.
Detective is weekly. Batman has gone back to monthly.
Yeah,
but Detective is going back to monthly. I believe in March. Thank God.
Okay.
4 weeks is 1 a week thing. I can't do it. I can't.
It's too much.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. But yeah, it's insane.
And we could do a whole podcast on the price right now too, because I do get upset. Gentlemen, I don't know about you guys, but it's starting to get ridiculous. $5.99 for a comic book. I don't know about you guys, but
it's like when you were saying you got yours, the one that's on your shirt for 50 cents, and it was 100 pages. I'm like, what universe is this?
Yeah. I remember I remember the 50-cent comics. I remember the 25-cent comics.
Yeah, but for 100 pages though, like you getting 100 pages now, you paying $10.
$10.
Like,
I remember 4 for $1 back issues. If it wasn't a key, you could get them. You could get anything.
I think that with the cover that he has on his shirt, that Nick has on his shirt, my comic guy has the original cover, like the original comic, I should say. I could buy it, like if I had the money that it costs now, I could buy it because it's the first appearance of Scarecrow. You said
it's not the first appearance. Okay. It was just the first time I saw him.
Okay.
I don't think I have the back issue too because I don't have the original stuff, but I bought it years ago. It's not an issue that's particularly worth a lot of money.
Okay.
I think I might have paid like $10 or $12 for it many years ago.
No, because the one I'm talking about is the first appearance of Scarecrow.
Oh no, that's worth a lot of. Yeah, that's.
And he had it on the wall. I'm like, oh, Christmas is coming up. I'm like, how much is that?
Yeah.
And I can't remember what it was, but he told me. I'm like, I read it's staying on the wall because.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if I spend that kind of money, you
Yeah.
might as well hook me up on the wall.
Well, real quick too. I got sucked into that stuff in the 90s too, because you guys are young, but right after that death of Superman and Nightfall, these issues started escalating quickly, right? Into value. They're not even worth now what they were then. That's how crazy this whole thing is. You know what I'm talking about.
Sir, I exactly what you're talking about, because I went to college and it was the first time I was ever in a city with actual comic shops.
Okay.
And stuff was coming out and you'd see these key issues and you'd be like, oh, I better go ahead and snag that, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so what I started doing is in the 90s, it became very decadent, where you had the foil covers and there was the first variant covers, the hologram covers, and you would have, like, remember Jim Lee's X-Men came out and they had like 7 different covers, #1 covers, right?
Right.
So I got to a point where I thought I was like investing. I thought I was buying stuff that would literally I would hold on to, and I would be able to send my kids to college.
Yeah.
Well, that obviously went south very, very quickly.
Right.
And it's hilarious because everybody was doing it. It was a weird decade.
Mm-hmm.
I had the charm and the innocence of the 70s going to the 80s. And then something about that 90s really put a sour taste in my mouth for comic collecting, because I got sucked in, guys. I'm not lying to you.
Mm-hmm.
I was buying 4 or 5 copies of the same issue, bagging it and boarding it. And then years later, I didn't even get the money back for what the issues, what the cover, what the price was on the cover.
Oh yeah.
You know, I just had too many boxes of comics. My wife's like, you got to get rid of this stuff, man.
Yeah. Well, the presses ran on those issues. And that's why they weren't worth anything, because everybody had them.
Everybody had them.
When I saw that, the Superman 75, where he actually died, when it like sold like 1.7 million copies.
Yeah.
Like, well, how many of those are going to be around 20 years from now then? So
it's worth nothing.
Yeah.
It's worth absolutely nothing. You know, the only thing that'll hold its value is like a first appearance of some of these modern day characters that have kind of, like the Harley first appearance or one shot. There's a few things that I have that I look back on and I'm glad I didn't get rid of.
Yeah.
But for the most part, there's really not much that you're going to turn in and make any kind of money.
It's got to be the older vintage stuff.
Yes.
Again, unless it's something that like nobody was buying, like Walking Dead #1. There was only like 8,000 copies made. Nobody was buying it back then. Then all of a sudden it becomes a TV show, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a rare like blend of circumstances. Then you'll get something that's valuable.
Right.
Just like there's this Moon Knight show coming out, right?
Yeah.
And nobody knows who Moon Knight is. Nobody knows. There's And
Chris Evans knows.
Yeah, well, Chris Evans knows. He knows. He's our guy. Yeah. He's a stupid. But my son and I were laughing. We're like, there's all these Moon Knight fans now, right? And the comics, we go to the comic shop and they're all gone, and the value went up on them. And I'm just laughing because I'm like, there's just no way like that anybody really knows. No, and the show's going to be great. I'm going to love it. And it's going to be wonderful. And it's going to do what Marvel does best, introducing these characters and making them household names. But for anybody to have the fortitude 2 years ago to be like, I'm going to buy Moon Knight comics because they're going to do a television show.
Yeah.
Forget it.
You'd have to be Nostradamus to figure that out.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I remember the Hulk on Planet X fighting Groot. And had anyone told me in 2010, they're like, yeah, Groot's going to become an international sensation, I'd be like, yeah, whatever.
Amazing, dude. Unbelievable.
If somebody would have told me a movie with a talking tree and a talking raccoon would make more than a Superman movie, I would have said,
you're out of your mind, right?
Get out of here. Go. Yeah. Please get down the highway you're taking. And then sure enough, I'm like, well, guess I was wrong.
Yeah, it's just hard to believe where we're at. I always call this on our podcast the golden age, but it's amazing that it just keeps going on and thriving, and it's wonderful. And for somebody like me who's been around for a long time and remembers when I never thought I'd see anything like what we're
Oh,
seeing now.
absolutely
So
not.
that's
Absolutely
beautiful.
not. Absolutely not. For sure. For sure.
Well, and that's why when I hear a lot of, and I'm not trying to be ageist here, but a lot of like younger fans are like, "Oh, that movie didn't live up to my expectations," and I'm like, I never thought I'd see that character, so I don't care if the movie did get
exactly right.
bad reviews. I'm still happy to see that character that I never dreamed I would see.
100%.
Like even for example, like something like The Flash. I mean, I never thought I'd see The Flash in a movie.
I didn't know how they would do it. I didn't think it was possible.
I mean, the fact that we got a TV show in the 90s, I was like, all right. I mean, count my lucky stars. That's it. At least I saw him in live action. And here we are, finally after years of stop and started, we're going to get it. But it's like, who would have thought that?
Nobody.
The fact that we got a Green Lantern movie, albeit the quality is, you could debate it all you want. But the fact that we got one is a shock to me because I never thought that was going to be a thing. And now we're on the way to getting an eventual series, which is great. But who would have thought that these things were gonna be on our screens, and that it would be cool, or would we be in the in the cool space to be able to talk about the fact that we collect a lot of comics and now we're going to talk about them. But who would have thought that would have been possible years ago? Nobody.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you bring up
go ahead, sir.
No, you bring up a great point because when I was young, the stigma was that like if you read comics, you were like an introvert, you were geeky.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I wasn't. I don't want to sound stupid. I was not that. I wasn't like the most outgoing person, but I kept that stuff to myself.
Yeah.
And it was a very private hobby that I had for a decade. The only people that knew were like my parents, my sister. I have very good friends for 35, 40 years to this day that don't even really truly understand because they're not into it. And they don't even know, nor do they care. And every once in a while I'll try to throw something and I'm like, hey, did you see this movie? I don't like Star Wars. I don't like this. I don't like that. Now, some of them have converted because they've had kids and grandkids and they like the MCU. They like the superhero stuff. But I got to be honest with you. It was a lonely place. It was like my own sanctuary that I had. Yeah. And, even when I met my wife, I didn't tell her that I had like comic collections and stuff like that. It was, we moved in together and that's when I was telling you guys the death of Superman. So I started bringing the stuff home and she's like, what's this? I'm like, I used to be a big comic collector and there's some stuff coming out now and I'm going to start buying some of this stuff. And we had a little apartment. She's like, oh yeah, that's cute. Oh, that's so nice and everything. That's kind of funny, but then the closet started getting filled with boxes and she's like, this is out of hand. She's like, this is crazy. So it's just a weird thing, Adam. You guys couldn't be any more right. It's a wonderful thing. I always said this. I say this to everybody. It's cool to be a nerd now. It's been cool to be a nerd probably since me and Pete talk about this a lot. I really think it started with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movie. Yeah. I look at that to me as like the beginning, even though a lot of people point to 2008 with The Dark Knight and Iron Man. I think you could kind of be subjective here and say, was it Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy? Because I know that thing made a lot of people I know who weren't comic book fans love that movie. It's like a lot of people love The Dark Knight who don't read comics, don't like Batman, don't like Superman. And of course, we know what Iron Man did for the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. So there's that kind of that little 4 or 5 years there where it's cool to like this stuff. It's part of culture now. It's part of it. It's here,
No, but you're right. It had to be, I would give it more. And this is coming from, the Batman flag bearer. It had to be Sam Raimi's Spider-Man because around that time I remember it was the combination of that and Smallville being on TV.
Yes.
That was, and part of the fact that I had to go on a trip that led me back. Those three factors led me back into the comic store.
Yep.
Right? So it was that time period.
Yeah, because a lot of people As great as 89 was, and I was there, and I was 24 years old when that movie came out. And I was just ecstatic that I was finally going to get a Batman movie.
The first movie I ever saw that I can remember.
Adapting him to how he was.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I took two friends with me who did not know that I was a comic book collector. They weren't into that stuff, but we walked out of that movie and they loved it. They were fans, but it still did not change the culture of the general audience to where people were like, yeah, Batman was cool, but nobody really went and started reading comic books, and nobody did this is before obviously social media and the infancy of computers. So that's the only argument I have with my guys sometimes is I never diminish what 89 did. It just like Superman 78.
89 did it for the movies, but not for the comic industry.
But it did not create the cultural impact that the Raimi Spider-Man did, and then the Dark Knight, and then Iron Man, to where we are today.
Yeah, I
and a lot of it is timing. It's obviously you can only do with what's going on in the world, but yeah, you guys are absolutely correct too what you're saying.
Like I think 89 affected the movie space and blockbusters, but it didn't. I don't know that it was a catalyst to drive people to actually read the books.
No.
Whereas this other stuff is more to a degree than that. But I was laughing when he said he told his then future wife, I'm gonna get some of this stuff. The some part made me laugh. I'm like, that's always the some. Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah. Well, the story I liked is that you talk about this, Nick, about how it in the 80s it still was, you were very much looked at as kind of weird if you collected comics. And I remember going to wrestling camp and with a couple of hundred of red-blooded American males and all the other guys, they're teenagers and they're talking about girls and getting their first car, and I'm like, do you know the Hulk is gray now?
That's great, man.
Like, what is wrong with you?
I know, dude. And that's so awesome. And what's funny? You're always looking, right? You're trying to find that one other person, like in a crowd. You're like, is there anybody that feels the way I do? And I'm going to tell you, I was so outgoing and so social, but I'm going to be honest with you guys, man. It took having a son. I'm so blessed and lucky that I've got two wonderful kids. I've got a son and a wonderful daughter, but it really was him that when he got to be about 7 or 8, that became my ally with this stuff. Cause I still had listen to me. There was nobody. I went to go see Spider-Man with him and with a lot of people. And, my mom and dad, my dad's gone. He's been gone since 2006. And my mom's still alive and doing real well. They like it. And they recognize that I liked it from, a long time ago. So they were always fans of the movies too. My dad loved the Nolan Batman movies. He loved everything, but I never had that till my son got old enough. And then we're so lucky we met all you wonderful people in this podcasting community, but it's only until like the last 10 years, really, guys, that it's been like something that I can like kind of thump my chest and be proud of and converse on a level with a lot of people. It's not that long. It seems like it's when I talk to you guys, I feel like we know each other for 25 years and we've been talking about stories and stuff, but it isn't. It's such a short time span.
It's funny you say that because like I was so impressed and amazed that you and Nico do this together, the podcasting, and you enjoy this stuff together, you watch together. It kind of reminded me of like, Batman 89 was the first movie I remember seeing in theater, and my mom took me to see that movie. Now she doesn't read the comic books, forget it. Like she'll go pick them up when I give her the money, but that's the extent of her walking into the comic store and coming back out. But like whenever there's a movie, we'll watch it together. It's our new tradition. Like, I'll pay for her to watch it.
Sure.
And we'll watch the shows together. We'll sit down and watch the show. And so it's kind of that, like I kind of get that kind of feel. Like it reminds me of me and my mom, the way you and Nico do this. And the difference is, funny story. Like we'll be watching. I remember when we were watching Justice League, the theatrical version. I know that's heresy to some, but I went to the theater and watched that. Deal with it. Anyway, so we're watching, and my mom, knows Batman, she knows Spider-Man, she knows some of the different Marvel characters, and usually she knows the difference between the two. That one occupies DC space, and one the different universes. But I guess in this occasion, she forgot. So there's the moment in the movie where Barry is talking to Bruce, and he's not the Flash yet. He's like, she leans over and she's like, "That's Spider-Man, right?" And I'm like, really? Now you're coming up with this confusion? I'm like, no, that's not, but that's the Flash.
That happens all the time to me, man. That happens all the time with people.
But it's hilarious. It's like, this wasn't, you watched the Flash TV show. You never once called him Spider-Man. It's the same thing.
That's funny.
I still get that a lot from people in my age group who come up to me and they say, okay, why isn't Spider-Man in the Justice League? Or, why isn't Batman with the Avengers? That kind of stuff. So
absolutely. All the time.
You got my dad, and his response is, what's a podcast? And I have to explain, okay.
Yeah.
And then I remember one thing when we used to watch Smallville, he'd be like, isn't that show on? I'm like, what show? Because I wanted to hear him say it. Even if he had said Superman, I would have gotten it. But I never got Superman. I never got Smallville either. I'm like, the guy that flies. I'm like, really? This is where we are? He doesn't even fly in the show. But that's a whole other topic of discussion. But things have changed so much. It's amazing. And we're all the better for it. But
of course.
Let's dive into this wonderful comic that
we got to talk about a comic book now, huh?
Now that we've set up the state of the comic book industry in the world, let's talk about the comics. So Donnie, as you usually do, give us a little bit of background on this issue.
Okay, this is Detective Comics number 457. We're going to be discussing a story called No Hope in Crime Alley. And it opens with an exchange between Batman, who is fully dressed and heading out for a night of crime fighting, and Alfred. And one of the first things I notice is that he is much more curt with Alfred than usual.
Yeah.
There's no, kind of the father and son type of relationship, type of respect here. He's just like, don't bother me. I've got something to do. Yeah. And Alfred's trying to convince him to do, there are other things that could use your attention. And he's like, don't bother me. So right away, you get the idea that something is, really eating at Bruce here.
100%. And when I reread this, because it was a few years before I did, I didn't remember that, but it's weird now, right? Like to think that Alfred would not know something, or that he would keep, which is obviously a tradition because they mention on this day every year.
Yeah.
He leaves, he does this thing, and nobody knows about it.
Yeah. Yes, and the date baffles Alfred because you see after Bruce leaves, he's thinking to himself, why does he do this every year? Yeah.
I mean, come on, Alfred knows everything about Batman, right, Adam?
I was shocked that first of all, the attitude that he gave Alfred. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not familiar with this kind of usually there's banter, but not like do your job. Basically, do your job and shut up is what he's saying.
Exactly.
Lack of a better word. Phrasing. But again, as you go through the issue and you realize what Bruce is doing, I'm like, how does Alfred not know what day this is? Like I was kind of confused by that. I'm like, did Alfred not know? Does he not remember when the Waynes died? What's going on? So it was confusing. But I will say before we go on to the next portion, I really love this cover. This cover, it's beautifully done. Where you see like the Wayne murder, inside the cowl, so it's kind of like you're seeing inside of his mind, which is a cool kind of framing for the cover. I love that. I just was amazed by it.
And how much floor space that takes up in Bruce's mind.
Yeah.
Like that's the most important thing. Like everything centers around that.
It's very indicative of that. It's very good. But Donnie, I immediately, as I looked at the cover, I thought of you because, of course, we get to see Thomas and Martha Wayne.
Why did you say that name?
I was waiting for it the entire time I was reading the freaking issue. But yeah, the cover was great. I absolutely love it.
By the way, I freaked out people in the stores before. Just I'll hear somebody talking, Martha Stewart or Martha Wayne. Why'd you say that name?
Why'd you say that name? That's awesome. You talk about the cover now. Again, remember me I think I was about 11 when this issue came out. And it's one of the very first issues of Detective I bought because it took me a few months to realize that he had another monthly title or I think Detective at that time might've been every 2 months, but this cover was haunting because guys, at that time, I don't know until I read this issue. This is why this issue is important for me, that I really understood what happened to his parents because in the 66 television show, which I watched, I'm not sure they ever really talk about it. I think it's mentioned in the pilot that he lost his parents.
They say
but it's not in depth. They don't really talk about it. So today we sit here on this date and we've seen Martha and Thomas gunned down how many times, right?
45 at least.
We've seen it on live action. We've read about it like hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
But back then, when I saw that cover and I see the young boy, I didn't know that was him. I didn't know that those were his parents. I just saw the portrait of Batman.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it just was haunting. I'm glad you brought up the cover because it was, I saw it and I grabbed it. And then obviously we always say the cover. Somebody asked me one time, they're like, what's the most important thing about a comic book? I said, sometimes the cover is.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Because the cover makes you buy it. And sometimes there's a great cover and the story sucks.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a bad cover and the story's great, but the cover is the first thing you see. It's the first thing to kind of be like, it's like an album, right? It could have a very cool album cover and it could be great or it could suck. But
like if it's a comic you're not reading, but you see a nice cover, you may pick up that comic.
100%.
They may sell you on a comic. So they're key.
That's why so many like golden age heroes have these outlandish, non-functional costumes because they were trying to catch your eye on the newsstand.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have other ways to promote it. They had to catch you walking by.
Right on the cover, man. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But let's go just a little bit further here. And so what we see is that Batman heads to a place called Park Row, or better known as Crime Alley. And he's questioning various people in the alley about the whereabouts of someone named Leslie Tompkins. So as he is trying to find this person who we later learn is a woman, he stops several crimes, including the theft of a car radio and a couple muggings. And what I like here, he doesn't use like weapons or even his utility belt. He's doing this pretty much, fist to fist.
Yeah.
That's what I remember with a lot of Batman comics when I was a kid. He used his gadgets, but a lot of times it was just very cool, martial arts type of fighting. And he was outwitting and he was beating people with his athleticism and his tenaciousness. And that's what I liked about this story.
Yeah, it's grounded, right? I mean, literally, right? I mean, he's in a bad section of the city.
Yeah.
And obviously he's searching for this woman, which was, again, at that time, it was intriguing to me. I was like, who is she?
Yeah.
And he's, the thugs that are there are almost like, what are you doing here? Like, why are you here? Like, why are you bothering us here? We're just, we're trying to steal a few dollars. We're trying to steal a car radio. Like,
we're small timers. We're small timers.
Exactly.
Why are you here?
They're like, we're not the Joker. Leave us alone. But you know what really got me about this is it was specifically the car radio theft was that he didn't even have to do anything. It was just the intimidation.
Yeah.
Put it back.
Put the radio down now. And the silhouette scared the crap out of the guy. He's like, oh, it's Batman. All right, we'll put the radio back. And like, it's that again, it goes back to what we were saying, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the bulk or the size, but it's the whole persona, the silhouette, the costume, all of that combined that has the ability to scare the crap out of these people, especially the small timers. I mean, the Joker may not get scared by the visual aesthetic, but the small timers certainly would.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the almost victims turns out to be Leslie Tompkins, and Batman saves her, but one of the muggers, I believe his name was Gooch, pulls a gun on Batman. And of course, with Batman already, having his memories flooding his mind and his blood up from the fighting and already kind of agitated from the anniversary of the day, just starts to wail on this guy and nearly goes too far. And Leslie Tompkins actually stops him and calms him down. And she's like, anger it's bad for your health. I just like how she kind of thinks like, Sonny, chill out a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great part. And, it obviously, as he's beating him, he's recalling, right? Now we get like kind of the origin story.
Yeah.
Which to me, again, was very eye-opening to me at that time. And a lot of people, it's funny I don't hear a lot of people talk about this issue, but it was obviously, and I think that, I didn't read, I've been lying to you guys. I didn't read a lot of the Silver Age and the Golden Age stuff, but I don't think this Batman was kind of the reincarnation of Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, right? This darker. And so I'm not sure the tone of those comics, they wanted to tell this story. So again, as a young kid reading this, I'm like, I didn't realize his parents were gunned down in front of him. And it was very profound to me. And it was like, it's the first time in my life as an 11-year-old that I was like putting the pieces together in my head that this is why he's Batman, right? Because it's the first time I saw it drawn out on panels and explained to me the way it was. And that to me that's why this story just stays with me.
Right. Well, and the way that Dennis O'Neil writes.
Oh yeah.
He told it so beautifully. Obviously, as a Green Lantern fan, I owe him a huge debt. And we actually talked about the Green Lantern 80th anniversary, and there was a story in there by his son that was a tribute to him. And Adam had to take over because I had to like stop and like gather myself because I almost started to cry.
Yeah.
Because he was just that good at what he did. So
I was amazed at how they took, like the way they told the death of the Wayne storyline. It was very, like it didn't detract from what was going on in the main story. It kind of allowed you to see why Batman was going off the way he was going off. So it contributed to, the narrative more so than just, and here's a flashback for the umpteenth time, like that's the hindsight that we have going back is like, yes, this is the 400th time we've seen this event happening, but it was told in a very unique way. Like, again, I've seen this death play out, and not like the fact that we could do a top 10 list of the Wayne murders. Tells you how many times we've seen this event.
Sure.
But to see it in this new, fresh way, the way it was told, impressed me quite a bit. And seeing Batman go to town on these guys, I'm like, as I'm watching it, it reminded me of the moment in the trailer when Pattinson's beating the crap out of that gang, right? So it's like, all right, like I could clearly see, and I don't think I'm projecting here. Reeves is clearly pulling from the 70s.
Oh yeah,
his adaptation of Batman, which is fine by me if this issue's anything to go by.
Yeah. Well, and this story has so much soul to it because we see an interaction between Batman and Leslie Tompkins, and he asks her, "Why have you stayed your whole life in Crime Alley?" And she's like, she remembers that, and she's like, I want to help people and stop that from happening again. And he's like, you are the hope of Crime Alley. And it was so emotional. He kisses her on the forehead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's beautiful because up until that time, I'm reading Batman for about a year, and those stories were very grounded and they were very solo. Robin was not around for those stories I was reading. And this, it just happened to be the time that Denny was writing them.
Yeah.
And he had Alfred, and I was like very intrigued, like, who is this lady? And then you see as a young lady, she kind of helps him out after that tragic thing. And then I was like, oh, she still doesn't even know who he is.
Yeah. No,
because later on we're gonna read about her in No Man's Land, and she's gonna become a central character. And she knows who he is, and they have a very beautiful relationship. I don't want to say it's a mother and son, but it's close. It's kind of close to that.
Yeah.
She's very important. He doesn't have he's got a Bat family now, and there's like millions of people, right, that he's close to. But back then, the beauty of Batman was,
in that respect, he's the father, right? So it's not
that's right, exactly. But he doesn't have a lot of, you got Jim Gordon, you got Alfred, but it's not like there's a lot of mentors to him.
Yeah.
And so it was beautiful. And then when I reread this, I'm like you just said, my friend, I'm like, oh God, she doesn't know who he is. And she stays in that neighborhood to prevent another tragic accident like happened to that young man. And that's just, you're right. It's Daniel Neal. It's a story that's so old, but it feels timeless, right, guys? It doesn't feel dated. Does it feel dated to you?
No, not at all. No, this is quintessential Batman.
Yeah.
That was the surprise to me was that Leslie didn't know, because the Leslie that I'm familiar with is, the one that knows. And now they've recently pulled Aunt May with her and made her younger with each incarnation. It's like,
yeah.
The last time I saw Leslie Tompkins, it was what's the actor?
Titans.
Morena Baccarin. Wait a minute, hold on.
I
Gotham.
Yeah.
And
we do.
She's on the list. So,
yeah.
But to see her,
is she a multiverse wife?
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Yes. I should have known that. Yes.
This list grows with every episode.
Sure it does. Yeah.
There's going to be a crisis one day to keep it all in line. But no. So it was weird that so they've gone this. It's the older lady route, which was kind of weird to me, because the conception, I know even in the comics she's younger now.
She's younger now, yeah.
But also the fact that she didn't know was really like, that's interesting. And I think there's an extra emotional weight that she remembers that young boy that she helped. She's not sure how he turned out, at least according to this. But in honor of him and to prevent other kids from going through what he did, she does this every year. Or, and just as Batman, right? She's basically doing Batman, what Batman does, and his reasoning. He does this to prevent other kids from going through that trauma. But she does it really, like, legitimately on a street level, on an everyday level, where he does the grand scale, stop the crazy, the psychopaths, the murderers. Occasionally I have to go in space and fight, friggin' Starro or whatever. Right. But so it's like their missions like align, but they're on different levels. And I really like that parallel.
You're right about that too. And it's funny too, we talk about this era of comics, and Daniel Neal was great too. Is like, I really miss those days too, where the Batman stories, because you're right, Adam, you can put him with the Justice League, and that's where he would go off into space on his ventures. But usually in Detective and Batman, the stories were so grounded and self-contained, and it didn't involve somebody taking Gotham over like every other week.
Yeah.
Which is one of the tropes that gets so overplayed in this modern era of comics, where it seems like the threats now have to be so big. Otherwise, the story's not good. And you go back to this era, gentlemen, and they're like, you're able to tell these single issue stories.
Yeah.
Some of them are dated. Some of them are a little crazy, but for the most part, a lot of them are really good, self-contained little pieces of art that define who Batman is. And you don't have to stretch these things out. I love me a good crossover. I'm not telling you that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But just leave Gotham alone. My God, every other week now, if it's not Bane, the Joker, the Authority, I mean, who would want to live? If you live in Gotham, you don't even want to go to the grocery store. I mean, it's like, why go to work?
I'll be honest with you. If I'm living in Gotham, here's the only reason why. Because I know there's a shot that I'll be kidnapped by either Harley Quinn or Catwoman.
There you go.
And listen, if I gotta go, like the Joker said in '89, I want to go with the smile.
I got you.
I don't want to get killed by Bane or the Penguin. Like, I want to put a stipulation. Like, if I was a citizen in Gotham, I'd have it in my will. Listen, if one of you guys are going to attack me, it's going to be one of these three. The rest of you, leave the hell alone.
Well, speaking of a smile, that's the perfect segue here. This story ends with Batman asleep in a chair at dawn, and Alfred walks in and sees him with a smile on his face.
Yeah.
I literally stared at that page for 5 minutes just because I was trying to remember when the hell was the last time I seen this guy smile.
Right.
And
doesn't happen often.
well, let me rephrase. When's the last time I saw him smile in a comic book?
Right.
And
Yeah.
I couldn't give you an answer.
Yeah. There was an issue of Justice League, I think about 5 years ago, where a kid told him a joke and he cracked a smile. The rest of the rest of Justice League was like, what? And he's like, Batman, and Batman was like, it was funny.
or maybe the time he ate pizza with the Ninja Turtles. That was the other.
That might be right. Sure.
Pizza is involved in who and smell.
Sure.
Yeah. But no, it was really, and even Alfred's reaction was like, Alfred's like, the look on his face was like, the hell's going on? He's smiling.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
what do you mean he's
dark,
happy?
Man.
I'm like, I smile when I sleep too, but I'm probably thinking of one of my multiverse wives.
It's a much different reason.
Exactly.
He's happy the city's safe. I'd be like, screw the city.
Yeah.
Like, I keep telling everybody, if I was Batman, Gotham would be destroyed, because I'd be like, okay, where's Catwoman? Where's Harley Quinn?
Where's Harley Quinn? Right.
Oh, the signal's going off. I don't care. Who cares?
You'd be under the control of Poison Ivy by now. Come on, man. You'd be in the botanical gardens right now, Adam, and you'd be just carrying on.
I'd call Robin. Handle this. I'm busy.
Yeah, he'd be all like,
one of you.
Yeah,
he would be fertilizer.
Yeah, exactly. He'd be all like lobotomized and watering sunflowers and
absolutely,
things like
man. You'd be part of Earth now. You'd be part of the ecosystem, and it would be a wonderful thing.
Uma Thurman is the best thing about that movie. I'll tell you that right now.
Uma Thurman.
Yeah, she's the best part of that Batman and Robin movie. I'll tell you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, no. This story was just. I'm so glad you recommended it, because it was the first time I read it. And in terms of single issue, one-off, one and done tales, I think it's up there as one of my favorites.
Well, I'm glad you guys enjoyed it, because, my thing too is like, I don't want to be the guy that's like, I always tell Nico, like, oh, go read this story or that story. But there's a few of those issues from back then that you guys, I know what big comic fans you are, and like Ryan Lower with the Batman Book Club. And I'm like, sometimes you just got to go back. And this story's been reprinted a lot. I think it's in the greatest Batman stories ever told paperback. And it's one that gets a lot of love when you go and you look at sometimes the top 10 single issue of Batman stories. You're going to see it. And again, I could tell all of us have a great affinity for Dennis O'Neil. I mean, he's just, when he passed last year, I don't, was that last year or 2 years ago? I'm a little bit.
2 years ago.
Yeah, it was, I was very sad, because he was the guy that, it was his storytelling, the way he wrote these things that hooked me as a young man. And I appreciate what he did in Neil Adams and creating this version of Batman, which is the Batman we're seeing now. We're going to see it in 3 weeks. We saw it in '89. We saw it in a little bit of Nolan's work. They created this definitive Dark Knight detective. Yeah, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you can give all the credit you want to Frank Miller, and rightfully so. But without Daniel Neal and all these guys that worked in this era, the Batman we know and love today wouldn't exist.
Yep.
Like, you can't have Dark Knight Returns without the groundwork that those guys laid. So when everybody says, "Oh, Frank Miller Batman," it's like, no. Let's take a step back. It's like, and look at, because it takes years, like for continuities in comic books have changed ad nauseum. Every 10, 15 years, it seems like there's a reboot, refresh, however you want to phrase it. But by and large, Batman's story and Batman, the core essential elements of Batman have remained in the Daniel Neal version of Batman.
Because you're right, because before that in the 60s, it was the campier, golly gee chum, that kind of stuff, which again, there's some really good stories and it's pleasurable reading, but it's more of that TV show Batman. In that go from the 50s to the 60s. So these guys kind of took it over and they made Batman their own. And you guys are so right. It is because of them that everything kind of flowed thereafter and allowed all those other creators to tell wonderful, great stories and enhance and improve in some areas. So
yeah. So I mean, these stories are always good to appreciate and go back and look at. If you've never read a story like this, go back and there's so many avenues. Again, we keep talking about how lucky we are in the visual sense that we get to watch all these things now. But as readers, some back issues can be very expensive, but we have the luxury of having, Comixology and DC Infinite for the US.
That's where I found this, and it's and as soon as I saw Denny O'Neil, I was like, oh, I'm gonna like this story.
But my thing is, like, we have the benefit now of, look, it costs you, if you don't want to track down the physical issue, it costs you $1.99 to get a great story.
Yep.
So, like, why would you not take advantage of that and just immerse yourself in some great stories? Don't just there's this mentality from some people that, well, if it's older than, if it's 10 years or older, what the hell am I going to like that? It's like, no, like, there are some gems that have stood the test of time, and I think they deserve to be appreciated. And again, if you're enjoying these movies, well, they're not basing, a lot of the time, they're not basing the storyline you're seeing in a film over the last 5 or 10 years. It's usually the stuff they're pulling from is older than that. So don't scoff your nose at, I don't read anything past 20 years ago. It's like, really, that kind of mentality doesn't serve anybody. So I would certainly take advantage of the fact that we have comic books at our fingertips now, literally. And you can get them for a reasonable, it's not going to set you back hundreds of dollars. Take advantage of it. They're so worth the read. It's so worth the time.
You're absolutely right. And go ahead, my friend. No, you go right ahead.
One of the things that I noticed, that I remember reading so many articles about Denny O'Neil when he died, and two characters that came up in every single article that I read, every tribute, was Green Lantern, of course, and Batman. That's how big of an impact he made on that character.
Yeah.
That he's synonymous with Batman in so many ways. So.
And I mean, his Green Lantern stuff is again, it's second to none. I was there for the inception of it, read all those stories, and it's just beautiful. I mean, it really is.
And it
has a huge impact on our culture. Yeah.
And what's great about him is that, like, if you watch a lot of the special features on the DVDs that of any Batman movie, they would always do an interview with Daniel Neal, and listening to him talk about Batman is basically the equivalent of ear porn. Like, it's just, I sit back and it's like, I can listen to it on a loop. Like, between him and now Matt Reeves, like, just let me hear that nonstop. Like, from now on, whenever I see people hashtagging nonsense and talking about global phenomenons that aren't global phenomenons, and restore this, restore that, and look at what's behind this picture of this turkey. From now on, I'm just gonna put those interviews in my ears and just block it all out and just enjoy the serenity of these geniuses talking about these characters.
That's so well said. It's funny too. Most of his work has been collected, and again, you can see it, but I'm still waiting. I don't know what's taking DC so long, because I'm waiting for, I think you could pretty much reprint in a couple omnibuses all his Batman stories. And I don't know what's taking him for a long time, because I know I would love to have him. And you're going to skip issues because he didn't write every issue. He'll have some 10-issue runs and leave for a little bit. But I hope they're working on something like that, because that would be a good thing for the younger generation, the people now that, if you don't want to take the time and go to Comixology or DC Universe and try to find them, just to have them all, because just to be able to pull a couple of volumes like they did with the Neil Adams artwork books, right? And they eventually, I think it's a crime to me. I don't know who's handling their reproduction department, because they're a little bit hit and miss, DC. Marvel seems to be much more cohesive, if you will, at getting that stuff out. But that's got to be on their list of stuff to come, because that, to me, I would recommend to anybody I met that is a Batman fan. I would say you need to have these 2 volumes, and everything you're going to read in there is why you're watching Batman on screen right now with Matt Reeves, why you saw Zack Snyder do Batman. I know a lot of it was Frank Miller, but it was still influenced by Denny. Why you saw Christopher Nolan's Batman. Why you saw Tim Burton's Batman? How about Batman animated?
Yeah. Well, even
How much influence is that by Denny O'Neil, right?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
And even the fact that, like, you know, in from what we know of the movie, like they've got him living in essentially Wayne Tower, which is the condo or whatever, like he was in the 70s. So I'm like, why haven't they taken advantage of it? Slap a picture of Robert Pattinson's Batman on the side, you know, the side cover, the side of the cover, and like, hello, money.
Yeah.
Like, look, DC, I already give you enough of my money, but I'll give you more if you print those 2 omnibuses down there. Take my money.
Yeah.
I want to give him my son's money.
I sound like
I'm not spending any more money. Don't tell him. Hopefully he won't listen to this, but I just point him in the right direction and say, listen, go buy this.
He finished college, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. He's working right now. He's got a full-time job,
He
you know.
He
Nico.
eats your food.
That's right. Yeah. He sleeps.
He takes up room and board.
Yes.
He can pay for a couple of omnibuses for you. Why not?
Right.
Yeah. And it's your birthday.
There's heat. Hey, there's heat in his room.
Yeah. And if he says, Dad, I can't buy it for you right now, turn the heat off.
When he turns the shower on, there's water.
Only in his room. Remember, like the 60s show where Mr. Freeze had that cold room and everybody else was dying. That's what you got to do. If he gives you the lip.
Oh my gosh. Poor Nico. Adam's trying to freeze him.
Yeah. You're giving me some good ideas, man.
Listen, I think he should spoil his father for his birthday. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Buy him a statue, buy him some omnibuses. Why not?
Yeah. Oh, I'm very lucky.
One omnibus a month is rent.
He's a good kid. He's a good kid.
He's a good kid. He's good.
He's good.
And so is Mr. Zednick too.
Oh, he's good.
Those guys.
I talked with him last week. We did a special episode. He's great too. He's
a great guy. I watched them both grow up. They went to grade school together. So it's an amazing thing to see those kids grow up and now be doing a podcast with them. So that's a lot of fun.
Like I said, I love the fact that you guys do that together. It's wonderful. But
that's awesome.
As we always do, let's rate this issue. So Nick, what we do is we do 5 for story and 5 for the art. So we'll throw it over to you. What's your rating for this issue?
For me first?
Yeah.
I'm going to give the story a 4.5 because I think it's an important historical piece of setting up the origin of Batman and introducing a character who at times is very important in the Batman universe, and that is Leslie Tompkins. I mean, she's been gone for decades, and then other writers, Chuck Dixon, will bring her back and make her important story. I got to be honest with you guys. I this sounds crazy, but I'm going to give the artwork a 5 because I love Dick Giordano was another guy from that era that just captures, for me, this is me personally, the quintessential Batman. Like when I close my eyes and I think of Batman, of course there's Neil Adams and Jim Aparo, but he draws that rendition of him beautifully.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, very well said. Donnie, where you at with this?
I'm going to go 5 and 5, and I have to admit my bias here, but this is the type of Batman story that I grew up with. Not every story back then, or very few, were like 70 issue crossovers. It's like Nick said here. It was a powerful story, usually told in 1 or 2 issues, and to be able to read this and have this whole story take me right back to the 70s, I just had a great time with it. So 5 and 5. Love the artwork, love the story.
Yeah, for me, as I said, this was the first time reading it because, my comics reading really kicked into high gear in 02, 03. And I was just blown away by the emotion of it all. And also, the way they did some things differently, the way they told the origin, the way they handled Leslie Tompkins. It was all, we're talking about a 30-something-year-old story, over 40 even.
40 years old.
Yeah.
And yet it felt like a unique, fresh look at a character that I absolutely love. So for me, the writing is a 5, and the art's a 5. I just I just love it, and it made me want to. I'm like, I want to read more of that. I want to go through the 70s run and read the whole thing. So So yeah, I'm so glad I got a chance to read it, and this was an absolute blast. We definitely want to have Nick back on for sure.
Definitely.
We've been talking about off air. We've been talking about doing a special series regarding one of the books that Nick mentioned. So we'll schedule that out, and we'll have him back for sure. But in the meantime, if you want to follow him, you can. He's got a variety of different avenues you can. So tell him, plug away, sir. Plug your
Sure.
Twitter handle, your podcast. Go ahead.
First off, I want to thank you, gentlemen. It was an honor to be on here.
Thank you.
And I'm very I can't tell you how good it makes me feel that, and I know you guys are sincere that you really enjoyed the story, and your podcast is wonderful. Your passion comes through, and the Green Lantern stuff is outstanding. I'm waiting for that series. I'm a little impatient. I've been waiting for that a long time, and I'm waiting for the movie. And sometimes I get a little angry at Warner Brothers, and I promise I won't anymore because I know it's coming.
Are you going to boycott? That's
no, I'm not going to hashtag, and I'm not going to boycott. I'm not going to do anything like that. No, I'm going to go see everything and watch everything, and that's why I'm mad at them, because just put it out, because I'm going to watch that, and I'm going to buy all the merchandise and support it wholly. You can follow me on Twitter at Caruso Jr., and I do a great podcast with my son Nico and our good friend Nick Zednick called the Vigilante 1939. Where we talk heavily DC, Marvel, all the TV shows, the movies, the big stories, whatever comes out. And it's just a blast. And because of that, I'm fortunate to meet gentlemen like you guys, and our whole nerd community. I feel right now it's just a great place to be.
Awesome. Well said.
Well said, sir.
Definitely listen to those podcasts. I've listened to both. I regularly listen to both. And worldwide, everybody, listeners, viewers, I don't know where our viewers come from, but if you live in other countries, let's make their podcasts and videos a global phenomenon. Let's go. Let's make that happen. Come on,
a global phenomenon, right?
But,
it's been, Adam, it's been said, I think we've had 5 billion or 3 billion.
Oh yeah,
we've generated $3 billion for the industry. So
$3 bajillion. Yeah, that's it. It's a whole new number. Donnie, where can we find you to talk about global phenomenons and other such things?
You can find me on Twitter as the Emerald Enthusiast. Let's talk comics. Let's talk collectibles. Let's talk Green Lantern.
And if you want to talk to me or yell at me or whatever you want to do, because there's some people that want to do that, you can at Adam_LeafsFan. That's my personal Twitter handle. The podcast network also has its own Twitter handle at MMNPDC. We also have a Facebook group, which will be in the description below. Click that, I will add you, and we can continue the conversation there. But until next time, remember that Batman and Batman in the 70s is forever. From the first mission in Crime Alley to the last. So long, everybody.
So long, everyone.